Hey guys, this is Tono. Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. This is going to be a deck that I am going to be building for my 7-year-old. My 7-year-old is looking to potentially start playing Magic the Gathering, and at the moment we're playing with the beginner box and kind of starting out there, going to go through that, then potentially pick up the welcome decks for Spider-Man. But then eventually, obviously, he will likely want to get into Commander because that's what his dad plays, and I enjoy playing Commander and everything. Now, I will say straight up, I'm not going to just chuck him into a 4-player Commander game straight out the bat or anything like that. We're going to play 1v1s to start off with. We're going to start it out slow and everything and make sure that, he's aware of his deck and how to kind of play and stuff before we kind of start building up, right? Like, you should not, I don't think, chuck somebody straight into the deep end of playing Commander, especially when they're super young, super likely to kind of just chuck it in if they get too stuck or anything like that. But eventually he will be wanting to play Commander alongside his dad because that's what I play. If he didn't want to play Magic, that would be fine, but that's what he enjoys. So I have gone ahead and kind of built him a super duper easy beginner deck, and I will be likely building one for myself to kind of go against it, so that way we can kind of keep the power levels roughly the same. That kind of bracket 2, it's not bracket 1 kind of memey goodness or anything like that, but early kind of low bracket 2, built even easier than like pre-cons and everything. Now I've built around Spider-Man because he loves Spider-Man and everything, but I do think that green is a very great kind of beginner color, so that's where I've kind of started off with green and kind of looking at the Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales here. So this is the one that's going to be coming with the welcome deck, and kind of what I built the deck around is him as the commander, but mostly it's just built around, +1/+1 counters, because they are a very easy kind of mechanic to learn. It's going to get him doing some kind of simple maths, which, he's absolutely stellar at maths, but this is going to help him get, some easier kind of maths going with like just adding up the +1s on and then adding up the power and toughness and everything. Kind of just teaches that early kind of combat and stuff. So this is the Spider-Man, as I said, from the welcome deck. He's got vigilance and trample, and then he's also got whenever he enters or attacks, you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Then they gain trample until end of turn. So a really big, enabler for a wide board state, as well as kind of buffing up your creatures a lot, and that trample to allow you to be able to kind of trample through and get that easy combat in. So the way I built the deck is trying to aim around these kind of easy mechanics, these easy to learn mechanics that are kind of built on to start with in the beginner deck, and then kind of expand them off a little bit here. So if we have a look, first of all, in our artifacts here, we've got some, pretty simple, straightforward artifacts. Not necessarily these printings for cards as well that I would get. These ones here that actually say what they do and everything like that have the listing as to, like the reminder text are the ones that I'm going to be aiming more towards, just to make sure that, like, in case there's some in here that don't have that kind of stuff. And this is below $100 as well, this deck. So we've got Soul Ring in here because, Soul Ring is just great. Some protection for his commander here with the Swiftfoot Boots and Bone Savers. I believe there's a Swiftfoot Boots in here that will remind him about what, like this one here, that reminds you about what spells and what Hexproof and Haste do and everything. That'll be the one I kind of aim towards. Herd Heirloom. I did want this deck to, while the deck's meant to be easy and straightforward, I do want it to be, not completely awful. So that way I'm able to kind of make adjustments and kind of build this up for him. Like, he can start out with Miles, and then we can add in some like Hydras and stuff later on to kind of start buffing up the power and continue on from there. In for our creatures, most of our creatures are very, very straightforward. Just +1/+1 stuff. We've got some mana dorks in here to help kind of get him earlier, get Miles out earlier and everything. Just more +1 stuff. Dusk Shells, Crawler here to give trample again. Arwen's just going to give more counters. It's all kind of very, very straightforward stuff. There's going to be some stuff that is a little bit more complicated than you would have seen within the beginner deck, don't get me wrong, and begin within either beginner box or within the welcome decks, which is why we're starting out with those. But this is, I do think, a good kind of progression from there. Most of it's just going to be, as I said, the counter stuff. There's some stuff in here that's going to be triggers as well. So this one here is like the Forgotten Ancient. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So therefore it's going to get him starting to look at and kind of pay attention a little bit to triggers on other people's turns, which the beginner box and stuff don't really do. It's kind of a little bit higher than what he's got at the moment. We've got some Death Touch in here. Again, I heard there's an Oran Frostfang, but I don't think Death Touch really has a reminder text. No, there's no Orin in here with a reminder text, but that's why I'm going to be playing it with him to remind him as to what some of these abilities do and everything. Yeah, just kind of straightforward. The enchantments here are mostly around just getting additional +1/+1 counters. So kind of that the replacement effects kind of thing. So, if you do this, then do this instead. And that's the kind of stuff that when he first starts out, it's going to be a little bit harder for him to remember. Like, I'm putting a +1 counter on something. Oh, wait, don't forget about this jazzy. And then he can put the extra ones on, whether it's the hardened scales or the branching evolution, etc. Yeah, and then just, some card draw in here because card draw is kind of important. Instance, so there's a few instants and sorceries in here as well. I didn't want to go all creatures for him. Like, I could have just gone completely super duper easy beginner and gone like, here's a whole bunch of creatures and stuff, and that's it. That's your whole deck. But I feel like once we go through the beginner box, the welcome decks, and even maybe some of the starter kits that I've got there, this is like, kind of stepping up a little bit. And even those do include some instants and sorceries in them. So the instants and sorceries in here are mostly just stuff to kind of buff up his own creatures, but there is some removal in here because learning about removal, I do think is important. And it's the removal stuff in here is relatively kind of straightforward as well. Lands, very simple, just mostly forest because this is a pure green, mono green deck. And then to our sorceries here are, our ramp up stuff, which you typically have and is important and, aren't too difficult to learn. And then some card draw stuff as well. And then otherwise, it's just kind of some finishes here with like Overwhelming Stampede. Venom Blast is going to be a huge kind of removal plus a buff up to his commander too. And then Harmonize for just some card draw. Azorius Predation in here for a big kind of, win con / board wipe-ish kind of thing. Because I do think while, as I said, it is aimed for a new player, having a kind of board wipe in here is important, and that's the best they got in mono green. And then Rishkar's expertise in here for just more card draw. So I think that, having a look at this and knowing my son, I do think that this is going to be a relatively very easy, straightforward deck for him to pick up, as long as I do pick up the cards that have the reminder text on there, just to kind of, make sure that, there's not going to be one for Sasha's Chocobo in here that reminds you as to what landfall is, but that's because landfall's described on there. Most stuff, has it on there, especially like stuff that came from commander decks, like the Gear Sage here. Yeah, it should be relatively easy for him to be able to pick this up. So I'd love to hear from you guys as to what you think. I'll probably build like another one of these that's around like the Spider-Man from them. So that would be like a mono white one. However, if people are interested enough, I could potentially build one around each color. There's these welcome decks that are coming out and they are designed to kind of get people into the game. But beyond that, if they're starting out commander, then, it's good to have very starter kits. And they've got the starter kits that you can pick up, like the starter commander deck, sure, but I think even like a step before them, like a monocolored, simple, straightforward deck, especially one that's easy for like a 7-year-old to pick up, is going to be a great thing. So I'd love to hear from you guys as to what you think. Have a great day and goodbye.